Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark, and like you, I'm a professional speaker and I love listening to Speakernomics. Speakernomics is a professional speaker show that will help you thrive and grow a speaking business so you too can change the world, one keynote session workshop and speech at a time. And on this episode, we welcome back Patricia Fripp. She is a CSP, a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, executive speech coach, sales presentation and online learning expert. She's a recipient of the Cavett Award, as well as the first woman president of the National Speakers Association. And you'll see her in a chapter soon because she's spoken at close to 500 NSA chapter meetings. She's known to her friends as Fripp. Fripp, welcome back to Speakernomics. How are you today?
I am superb.
Fantastic. Now, to all my speaking friends, we so often, especially on this show, talk about the business of speaking, getting that gig. But what about your own presentation skills? Are you doing enough to evolve your own game to stay up to date with what's needed in your storytelling and messaging, not just today, but tomorrow? What does it take to be that legendary speaker and to shape the right kind of presentations for many years to come? And before we jump in, make sure to go to speakernomics.com. That's where you can find the tips, insights, and knowledge to help you become a better speaker, build a better business, and get paid to speak. Fripp, let's dive in. From a presentation standpoint, especially with all the business speakers, what is the best way to tell a story that both entertains as well as one that drives home a good business message?
The story needs to be relevant to the audience who is listening. And a question that we all have to ask ourselves as we're looking through our presentation, why would they care? And if they don't, how do we make them care or select different story? When I work with executives, which of course is a lot of how I make my living, I'm always asking them, one, about their life. So for example, my favorite way of opening a conversation to get to know people is, where were you born? What did your parents do? What advice did they give you that helped you become who you are? Because for executives, I'll tell them, your associates, your partners, your customers, they will respect your position as president. They will fight in the streets if they feel they know and relate to the person behind the position. So it's one, finding out how you can tell stories that are personal, that are about their industry or their business. And with executives, I always find, who is the hero of this speech? We always find with my regular leaders, who are we going to talk about that's an everyday hero that also represents them? So number one, make your presentation relevant to this audience.
You mentioned that you work with a lot of executives, but I know over your career you worked with a lot of speakers, and you also have been a Hall of Fame speaker and delivered many presentations on your own as well. What is the most common mistake or mistakes that you see even experienced speakers making today, and how can those be avoided and or remedied?
A mistake perhaps that some seasoned speakers might make is to feel that they know their presentation so well, they can pretty much get on stage and deliver it. And I would suggest to every speaker, you need, especially at the beginning, to have a core message and then expand the examples for each of the points you have. For example, sometimes people say, Patricia, I want you to help me create 4 speeches. And I say, well, why don't we work on one that you're going to love so much that you can then personalize to different industries and then keep adding to it? Because as we had a conversation earlier, a lot of presentations are no longer, we used to always think an hour keynote. Now it might be a 30-minute keynote. It might be a 20-minute keynote. It might even be a 10-minute center stage presentation. So you need to be able to cut and paste, as it were, your content based on this audience. So one, don't take your material for granted. I would look at your core speech that always works and then think, like Jeannie Robertson always used to, what new something can I slip in to keep it fresh for her? And we always have to stay fresh. And I would always look at what personal story, perhaps from this industry or this company, can you add to this presentation that they know is for them. You didn't deliver this yesterday and you won't deliver it next week. Something really personal. Now, if you're a seasoned Hall of Fame speaker, hey, I get $25,000 for this every day of the week, then I would say, have your speech, not your demo, a live, raw, unedited speech, and have it transcribed. And this is what I do with some very famous speakers. We take what came out of their mouths. There's the presentation we plan. There's the one we deliver. And then the next one that is improved if you review what you did. And listening to it and watching it isn't good enough. You need the script. And then you might yellow highlight every paragraph or sentence that began with I and see if you can restructure it. You're not going to speak and not say I. But if you look at a transcript, and I have done this, and every paragraph, multiple sentences begin with I, they need to be restructured. We all have repetitive phrases that we use. Well, you might have your pet phrase, but you're not going to use it 18 times in a presentation. So you need to highlight that. And then for me, it's always non-specific language. Every time you say thing, highlight it. It is never a thing. What is it? Find a better word that's descriptive. And then you might look at, and this is perhaps with more novice or business speakers, you talk about in a short period of time. Well, I need to know. A short period of time could be 2 years. It could be 2 weeks. It could be 2 months. I look for specifics. I look for phrases that give you more information than the amount of time it says to say it. So, for example, I was working with a lawyer who was talking about modern day slavery. And in the course of this presentation, she had a line that said, he promised her many things. I said, no, he didn't. He promised her a life of romance and adventure. And those 2 words give you more information and emotional context that you can understand why this young woman would leave the safety of home. So even a seasoned presenter that takes a fresh look at the script, and it's very important, don't think of this as me. If I was giving advice to this speaker on this script and look at it from an outside point of view, what would you do? Because even fabulous, amazing, in demand and highly paid speakers, if they looked at this script, could find a way to improve it.
I guess that's when you fripp the script.
Yes, it's frippnotized.
Well, I want to set up some context with this next question. When you think about the presentation skills for today and tomorrow's speakers as they against where they were before, I know we've spoken about some brilliant storytellers like Mark Scherenbrock or Don Hudson, even a Zig Ziglar, and there are obviously many others inside NSA and out. But when you think about somebody like Mark Scherenbrock, for example, or Don, you can hand them a microphone, and that's pretty much they would need in any era, whether it was 50 years ago or 50 years from today. But the speaking game obviously is evolving. I think it's kind of funny coincidence that you were president in 1984, and I just happened to Google that that's the first year that a TED Talk came out. So now those speeches are 18 minutes and shorter. And a lot of the public knows of the TED brand, but they don't know the difference between, holding an audience for 18 minutes versus a longer keynote. And then we start looking at what you did in 2024 on being on the panel for the last story standing competition, which was brilliant. It even showed the power of a 5-minute talk. So when you think about changes like that, especially with all the stimuli out there, as far as presentation skills go for speakers, how should they be adapting to the changes as the speaking game evolves, or at least considering things? And I give time as an example, time on stage as an example.
Whether you've got a 10-minute talk, a 30-minute talk, an 18-minute talk, a 38-minute talk, always focus on what is my premise, my central theme, my big idea. And I have a very simple formula that you can fill in. And if you think, walk down the page, write who is the audience? So every, can, how. So you answer every professional speaker, every accountant, every sales associate from such and such. So you focus on this audience, every can, what are they going to do? And you can sell the topic or you can sell the outcome. And then how. So this is a simple formula, and it doesn't matter if you got 8 minutes or 18 or 80. You understand what the core premise of your speech is. So it could be, for example, every year for one client, I deliver a presentation on selling yourself and your ideas. And this is to payroll professionals. So the premise would be every payroll professional can sell themselves and their ideas. And the audience will think, oh, good, that's what I want to do. How do I do it? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the structure of your presentation. I could do that. That's selling the topic. But what I do is sell the result. So after my opening story, I'll make the statement, every payroll professional can get promoted. Oh, really? I want to get promoted. How do I do that? By learning to sell yourself and your ideas, especially to your senior leadership. Oh, how do I do that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So it doesn't matter how long you have, you need to know your premise. What's the big idea? And you prove it. Now you can prove it with one well-defined, crafted story if you got 5 or 6 minutes, or with 3 points and action steps and explanations if you've got an hour. So all generations of speakers, business and professional, Toastmasters, getting ready for your teenager to debate. It's all, what's your premise? What's the big idea? What do they need to know, whether you have 2 or 20?
What was a pivotal moment in your own career that shaped your own approach to speaking?
I believe I was already a Hall of Fame speaker when I hired my first speech coach. And I was rather a junkie. You just have to say, I can make you better, Fripp, and I've written you a check. I was the first person to say on stage that I worked with speech coaches, and many people came to me and said, "Oh, I'd never worked with a speech coach," and they said, I was very wrong, and it's a matter of having different points of view. So, for example, I met a choreographer, and I said, "Do you know anything about professional speaking?" He said, "No." I said, "Good, I want to pay you to watch me deliver this 3-hour," this was a presentation. It was on a stage like a keynote, but it was interactive, 3 hours. And afterwards, he gave me one piece of advice, which was worth the fee. He said, "Patricia, you do a magnificent job using the width of the stage. You don't do enough with the depth of the stage. So how do you relate that advice?" And when I coach speakers and when I work myself, you're going to come out and you're going to stand in a power position, middle of the stage, but not at the end. New speakers, and I remember I wasn't, we always stand at the end of the stage, and you're sort of leaning forward into the audience. And Ron Arden, who was a great speech coach that I brought to NSA, and I met him in my mastermind when he'd worked with Ken Blanchard. He always used to say, Patricia, don't lean into the audience, bring the audience to you. And so now I would always say, you walk out, you're not at the edge, you stand. Always stand still at the beginning. Now, there are exceptions for every rule, but for the most part, just while people are getting used to the sound of your voice and how you stand represents stability in your message and the company you represent, if you're a corporate leader. And then after your opening, you can take 2 steps on silence, stepping into your message. And then when you review your presentation, and then you might say, last story, take 2 steps forward on silence again, step out of the body of the speech for your close. As Laurence Olivier said, the art is hiding the art. So you have a technique like that. You don't do it 25 times in the presentation, or it looks like a technique. But at the beginning, so that's one way I would interpret using more with the depth of the stage.
That's great advice. Now for a little speaking trivia. What does the acronym TED stand for in TED Talks? Back with the answer in just a moment. Before we jump back to the show, here's a moment with speaker, author, burnout expert, and NSA member Janice Litvin. Janice, what does being part of NSA mean to you and your speaking business?
There's so much. I could fill up 20 minutes, but I'll try to be succinct. So number one, it's the people. People like Patricia Fripp, Craig Harrison, Kelly Swanson, Christine Cashin. And I love to tell people I've been frippnotized, because every time I have a new keynote, my first call is to Patricia Fripp, and she'll give me a really dynamic opening that nobody's ever heard and nobody's ever used. Not only that, Patricia nominated me to run the Northern California chapter coming out of COVID, and it was a very heavy lift, and she knew I had a lot of energy and that I would bring us back into the fore, which is what happened, and we got nominated and awarded an elite chapter, or whatever it's called, from National. So it's about the business of speaking, as you know, and the talent of speaking, and both of those have been hugely impacted by my NSA membership, and I'm happy to report that I am a 5-year member now.
Well, why do you like to attend the different conferences?
I love to attend the conferences because I've met new people. I've reconnected with friends that I've met only through Facebook. And by the time we meet in person, we're old friends. And there's nothing more valuable than a face-to-face. There's something electromagnetic that happens when you're in person with people, as I'm sure you know. And of course, there's a lot of learning from the main stage speakers and the breakout speakers. And I'm happy to say that NSA does do a survey every year to ask us what we need more of, what we need less of, what could have worked better, what did you love. And it's so many valuable lessons. My speaking business has, I couldn't put it in numbers, but in my mind has grown 1,000,000% since I joined NSA.
And here's the answer. The acronym TED, as it applies to TED Talks, stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And now, back to the show. What will you be talking about at Thrive in Orlando in 2025?
My favorite subject, which is how to open your presentation with impact, the power of the first 30 seconds.
So I've got a question that I want to ask you from a previous guest. We are experts at using words. What should we be doing to make sure that we are using words accurately? An example might be the right grammatical choice or even pronunciation. but especially for professional speakers, what could we be doing on a regular basis to improve our grammar?
Well, I would use the Frippy principles. 1, it's never a thing. What is it? 2, stuff is rubbish and debris, and it only belongs in your mouth when you're talking about the turkey at Thanksgiving or Christmas. 3, if you can't weigh it, it's not tons. You don't get tons of ideas at Influence or Thrive. You get 3 pages of notes and 6 actionable items. And if it's not fruits or vegetable, it's not a bunch. Be specific. How many is it? Is it 6? Is it 3? Is it 20? Not a bunch.
So what is a question that you would like to ask a future guest on this show?
When was the moment that you realized you were destined for this work?
Great question. All right, well, let's do a quick recap then based on Fripp's legendary advice. Number 1, make certain that with your stories that you think through what that story means to them. It's so important, not just what it means to you, but what it means to them. Number 2, focus on the audience. And I love this formula. She has the every can. Learn to sell yourself in your ideas. Make sure you understand what's that big idea and prove it. Number 3, even a Hall of Famer like her hired a speech coach. She just wanted different points of view on a speech, and I'm a big fan of that. Be open to advice from different points of view. And number 4, I'll just throw in, because I've heard her say this multiple times, in different conversations, be specific with your words, and I love that. Fripp, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Thrive in 25. Any last closing thoughts before we speak ourselves off this stage?
Yes, all learning requires repetition and reinforcement. You might be very, very seasoned, but not bad to go back and revisit some of the advice you got early in your career that helped you be the success.
Could not agree more. Friends, make sure to join us at speakernomics.com and let your voice be heard. I'm Kenneth Shark-Kinney, your host of the National Speakers Association's podcast, Speakernomics, and this has been another legendary episode of the show. Thank you, Fripp, for your service to NSA and for all of your advice on this show. And everyone listening, thank you for the privilege of your time. And remember, Speakernomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat.